Hello everyone and welcome to Fresh Mastered Channel. Today we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel.
Found out 4 days ago that my wife of 15 years has been sleeping with her best friend's husband. On Easter Sunday, after being out for a family thing, my wife's best friend came storming into our backyard hurling abuse at my wife, saying she was sleeping with her husband. My wife admitted it. After the confrontation had died down, I spoke to my wife inside the home and asked her to leave. I let her put our daughter to bed first. That night I booked her a motel room because she had nowhere to go and I didn't want her sleeping in her car. I got a knock on the door at 2 a.m. from the police, asking if I knew where she was. Turns out she had gone to the motel and called her AP asking for support, but her refused. She became suicidal and he called the cops. The rest of that night was her texting me telling me she wanted to die because of her actions. I had to tell her to think about our daughter. Thankfully that long night passed and she didn't self-harm. My family arranged for her own parents to take her in for the foreseeable future. The next few days have been a flood of remorseful messages to me, telling me how sorry she is, etc. I had to ask her to stop and leave me alone. I need space and time. I've been trying to keep busy. I've been going to my normal training, BJJ, and taken the week off of work. My daughter is with her currently. I have no idea what I want to do. I know it's too early to make any decisions. I honestly just can't see how I can ever trust her again. I feel so emasculated and sad. My wife has always had mental health problems and I have always supported her or stepped up whenever she needed help. She stopped working for a long time because of depression and I took on work that paid really well even though I hated it. I quit the Army Reserve because she couldn't handle me going away once every few months. Since the start of the year, though, she has been nothing but distant emotionally. Everyone thought it was a massive depression bout, but this is when the affair started. We never had a massive sex life, but it went from sporadic to nothing. I kept trying to support her, taking on more and more around the house. She was studying FT, I am working FT. All the cooking, all the cleaning, all the caring for our daughter. However, she would spend nights out late with her friends, or lock herself in the bedroom sleeping. When I got frustrated with this, she was very apologetic, kept saying she would try harder, but it was more of the same. Now, knowing she was having an affair, it makes sense. The confrontation on Sunday was brutal. Her friend went nuclear and told my wife's whole family. My plan is to not speak to her for 2 weeks and then see how I feel. Part of me wants to try and fix this, but I don't know how I could look at myself in the mirror if I did. I had an affair with my best friend's husband. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was pretty close. I married young and, by the time I reached my 30th birthday, I had 4 young children, the home of my dreams, financial security, and a husband who, if less than perfect, was a good person and provider. We had fun together and a busy social life, even if we never set the world alight between the sheets. I just assumed that I wasn't supposed to have it all. A sex life that ventured from the mundane to the grin and bear it was the price I assumed I needed to pay for all the other trappings of a middle-class existence. One day, it just wasn't enough anymore. I first met Joe at his daughter's 6th birthday party. His wife Laura had become a good friend through numerous playdates we had organized for our daughters. The girls had become inseparable since meeting on their first day of school. Over the next few years, Laura and I became the best of friends. Her husband Joe, however, remained something of an enigma to me. Men had always been drawn to me, as I had to them, but every time I was in his company he appeared to fix me with an icy glare that always set me on edge. He didn't like me and I didn't like that. He wasn't a sociable man, but on the rare occasions that we did meet, his disdain for me bordered on rude. I was flummoxed. And intrigued. He became something of a challenge to me and, while having an affair never really crossed my mind, I was determined to win him over. I was bored in my marriage and needed a distraction. I began to find all sorts of fictional excuses to call to their home and, gradually, he seemed to warm to me. One night Laura invited me to dinner with herself and Joe. My husband was traveling for work, something that was becoming more and more common. I happily obliged. Later that evening, I finally found myself alone with Joe. Laura, having had too much to drink, had excused herself and wandered up the stairs to bed. In one life-changing moment, the atmosphere became electric and within seconds we found ourselves wrapped around each other in the most passionate kiss I had ever experienced. When I eventually left to return home, he came with me to spend the night. That was the beginning of the end. Our year-long affair began that night, and as it progressed, my interest in my marriage regressed. I was completely committed to my new love who had captivated both my mind and my body. I suffered from occasional pangs of guilt, but, in general, I was a master at compartmentalizing. My relationship with Laura continued, grew even and, through it all, I blossomed. Joe, however, was not doing as well. He was a faithful man by nature and our situation distressed him greatly. He struggled with the deceit and the guilt and tried on numerous occasions to end it. He always came back. Throughout this time, Ireland was on the verge of economic collapse and my husband was spending more and more time traveling in an effort to save his failing business. He had become somewhat manic due to the financial stress, behaving more and more erratically. I used the opportunity to indulge myself even more in my new favorite hobby, thinking little of the consequences that might result. I was drunk on love and, as far as I was concerned, that trumped everything else. 1 year and 1 month after our affair began, everything came crashing down when the guilt became too much for Joe to bear. He confessed to Laura about his indiscretion. He didn't mention my name but she had her suspicions, knowing her husband as she did and witnessing how he began to behave around me. My husband had also started to suspect something and when Laura confided to him what was going on in her marriage, everything clicked into place. And so, the nightmare began. Joe left his family home and stayed at a hotel while I navigated my way through the hellscape I had created. At home, in a fit of rage, my husband decided it appropriate to tell our children every sordid detail. They ranged in age from 6 to 12 at the time, and knew Joe and Laura as our friends and the parents of their own friends. My first encounter with Laura, after it all came to a head, was at our children's school a few days later. It ended with her spitting in my face as the children looked on silently. I deserved it, the children didn't. Their confusion and upset was heartbreaking for me to witness, but the biggest challenge to their innocent childhood came when their father finally lost control and punched me in front of them. That's when I knew that he had truly lost it, that I had pushed him over the precipice that he had been clinging onto for dear life. Nothing excused his lashing out at me, but I knew deep down that the man I had married would never have considered such an act. The stress of the economic meltdown had put him under such intense pressure that when he found out about my betrayal, it was more than his mind could handle. The worst part was, I didn't beg for forgiveness. I didn't promise to end it and I didn't ask him to stay. In many ways, I was relieved. I could finally stop living a lie. He left a few days after that, returning to the Middle East where he had been trying to cultivate some work. We never saw him again. He abandoned his business, his life and his children. Suddenly life became all too real. I found myself without money, security and abandoned by many that I had considered friends. I lost everything. I was the fallen woman in our neighborhood and the gossips delighted in it. Sidelong glances became the norm and the kids learned to live with the whispers about their mother. We struggled, but we managed. A few years later, my youngest son picked up the telephone in our home as we were packing up our belongings to leave. The house was being repossessed by the bank as my husband had fled with all of our savings. I looked at him expectantly to see who was calling and watched his face change from calm to confused as he asked, "Who is this?" After a short pause, he continued, "I think you're my dad."